Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, presented by Citizen 7. My name is Chris Spangle. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I am joined with Don Palmer and Greg Enas. And thank you so much, obviously, for being here on your own podcast. Thanks so much, Don.
That's right. We're getting the big bucks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest today and who we're talking to?
I'm going to let Greg give the introduction to Dave because he and Dave have some history at Eli Lilly.
Yep. I'd love to hear from you first, though. What's your thought about this podcast? Why are we doing this in general? Just set the tone for that.
Well, I think that my generation wasn't really podcast people, right? Like, podcast? What is a podcast? So it's taken me a little while to kind of get up to speed. But I think in terms of awareness, I think making a connection, so many people I run into are working from home.
Yeah.
So there are no water cooler conversations and meeting in, at a restaurant, et cetera. So to me, this gives us a little opportunity to bring out a subject and then have an opportunity to have some dialogue about it.
Why don't you talk about the new name? It was Lunch with Greg and Don, but Big Hearted Indy is the new name.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we want to have is a faith-oriented podcast, but really a very big tent. So whether that's evangelical, Catholic, Protestant, in other words, that we're all kind of on that journey. And instead of the word generosity, to really have a big heart. So for us to care about the city and our neighbor, not our particular subdivision or cul-de-sac. So I know I had a business in an urban area and really got to know such incredible people. And I think that that's the whole big-heartedness of just realizing that we live in an incredibly more diverse city, but a place that has some beautiful neighbors that we need to make, instead of strangers, make at least acquaintances.
That's beautiful. Well, that's exactly why I'm going to introduce Dave Lewis to us in a bit. Dave and I go way back at Eli Lilly. Saw Dave in the hall. He was always big-hearted there. Never had a chance to work on a high-profile project with him, but Dave has a big heart, and it's just a real honor to have you here, Dave. And in particular, not only some of the stuff that you'll be talking about that you're passionate about in the future, but would love to sort of share a bit of your story, where you came from, what formed you, and how did you even get to Eli Lilly and Company, and what did your career look like there? And then we'll have some time for Q&A about some of the stuff you're really passionate about that your heart is definitely in right now.
Well, thank you, Greg, and it's a great honor to be here. I'm an actual lifelong Indianapolis resident. I grew up on the Near East Side. I went to Arsenal Technical High School downtown, so I'm an inner city kid. Was fortunate and secured a scholarship to Wabash College. Went to Wabash and then went to the Indiana University School of Law in Bloomington. I came back to Indianapolis quite intentionally because for a variety of reasons. One, I love the city, but two, all my family was here. All my family remains here. My spouse, Lynn, her family is here and remains here. And all of our children and grandchildren are here. And so, you and I have a long history at Eli Lilly, and if you recall, there were some words, take what you find here and make it better. And my view has always been to live that way in our city. And I have been given opportunities through my career at Lilly, through other opportunities in the community and around the world to take what I find here and make it better. And so I'm very committed to that, and the work I do advances that.
Tell us in particular, say at Eli Lilly, what you did internally at the company that really you look back and say, man, that was a pivotal time in my career. And also, I knew you were involved externally, helping shape systems, structures, and culture. Would you share a little bit about that?
Well, I was the head of global taxes, and most people think of a tax lawyer as some boring personality, and I tried to be anything but that.
Or somebody you don't want to be around because you might sue us.
Yeah, exactly. But I led the global tax organization for Lilly, and in a pharmaceutical company, it's a critical operation because we manufacture around the globe, and we have to be strategic in where we manufacture. Taxes are part of the decision making. And in Eli Lilly's case, it was a significant factor. And so I worked with manufacturing and with other parts of the organization to design our supply chain so that we could pay the least amount of taxes possible, but the legal amount of taxes that were due.
Right.
And the philosophy that guided me in that regard was that our mission in the tax department was to save lives. Mm-hmm. And so every dollar we could free up goes to research and knowledge. And to me, that was a tremendous mission and one that I could connect every person in the world in my organization back to, no matter what they did. If they were crunching numbers, if they were defending us in the tax audit, they could connect themselves back to one mission, and that was to save lives by saving dollars. Mm-hmm. And so I was very passionate about that. But I didn't look at it from the standpoint of, we're going to check every box and report all the forms on time. It was, we're going to save lives here. Mm-hmm. And we did through a lot of work. And some of that work you alluded to, Greg, I spent significant time around the world working with our operations to ensure that we were working together to advance that structure, that supply chain structure. I spent significant time in Washington, D.C., trying to shape and lead the corporate community in terms of tax policy priorities, particularly keeping in mind policies that would foster a growth-oriented economy so that we can lift as much of our society up as we possibly could through economic growth. And so, and quite frankly, that philosophy was consistent with the philosophy that Eli Lilly and Company sought to achieve and sought to advance in terms of its own policies, in terms of healthcare, in terms of tax policy. And so we were synonymous with each other. A pro-growth economy served our company, and it served the people of our country. And so that's where I did a lot of my work.
That's great, Dave. You save lives, and I know you are saving lives by saving dollars and a lot more right now. As we enter more into sort of your current life and what you're passionate about moving forward, why you're still here at Indy, share with us a bit about what your overall driving motivation is for your love for the city and some of the activities that you have been that express that love for the city as well as into the future.
Well, I'd first, a little more on my background. I grew up as the son of parents who believed service to others was important. And my father was a small businessman, but he also was an elected member of the Indianapolis Board of School Commissioners and served as president at a very difficult time, quite frankly, when the original desegregation orders were handed down in our community. And guiding the community through that contentious time was not easy. My mother was always involved in PTA and all types of things. And quite frankly, I have 5 sisters, 4 of whom are school teachers. Wow. And so and by the way, my 5th sister now runs the small business my dad and mom started when we were young. And so we were taught to not just look at our own day-to-day lives, but look at the lives of others. And we all took on different roles that allowed us to serve others while earning our livelihoods at the same time. Extending that forward, after a 30-year career at Lilly, I did do some work outside with PricewaterhouseCoopers for a short while, and now I'm spending all my time doing either corporate boards or not-for-profit boards. And the areas where I'm most passionate, one, I am passionate about Wabash College because it changed my life. 2, I'm still passionate about tax policy, and so I chair a think tank in Washington, D.C., and that advances pro-growth tax policy. And finally, I'm very engaged in sports here in Indianapolis and ensuring that we continue to be a city that attracts marquee events to our city, that puts Indianapolis on the map. And when we put Indianapolis on the map, people want to work, play, learn, and live here.
Wow, that's beautiful. Go ahead.
I mean, I've got a couple questions as
we'll go around.
The younger guy in the room. No offense, but growing up in a very individualistic culture in the 90s and the 2000s, the idea of community service isn't something that's just in the water in the way that when you were growing up with your parents. I mean, if you're speaking to some of our younger listeners, like, what are... I don't want to say, like, I got in trouble in a conversation like, well, what are the individual benefits of serving? And they're like, well, you just serve. It's not about you. But I think younger folks don't quite understand what maybe you understood by watching your parents, because a lot of them didn't see their parents. I didn't see my parents doing service for the community. It was, we need to serve our family. We need to maybe grow our business. You know, so if you were talking to a younger guy about the importance of community service and you were mentoring them, what would you say? Why is it important?
That's a great question. And I do agree that each generation is different in that regard. I mean, the generation before mine had a lot of great challenges with the Depression and World War II, and then they grew out of it and built a nation. I think that I would, if I were, and I do mentor a number of people, the single biggest factor I think you get out of it is a sense of contribution and self-satisfaction. You also learn more about the community in which you live and the needs in that community. You know, Greg and I worked at Eli Lilly and Company, and quite frankly, you could be in a bit of a cocoon if you aren't looking outside of the hallowed halls. I mean, Lilly is a great, great company for our community, but it would be easy to just stay inside the walls of Lilly and not recognize what's going on outside the world. But when you reach out and you understand what's going outside and on all around you, it has an impact that comes back to your business. It has an impact that comes back to your personal lives, because you begin to connect what you do with what was going on out there in your society. And so for me, there's a business equation. I needed to know what was going on outside of the halls of Eli Lilly and Company. I needed to know what was going on in Indianapolis, in Indiana, the United States, and the world, because it was relevant to what I did at Lilly. At the same time, I could have an impact out there by changing the lives of one or two people through my direct contact, or through collective efforts, perhaps changing the lives of a group of people. You know, I'm reminded when I was on the 500 Festival Board, to give you a story, when I was a kid, and the 500 Festival Parade first started, my dad would get two ladders about 6 feet tall, and he'd put a board across, and he'd set the six of us on the ladders, and we'd look over the crowd, okay?
Ocean.
And I thought to myself, wow, I saw these people working the parade. I thought, wow, I hope I can do that one day.
Yeah.
Well, then I was sitting on the 500 Festival Board, and we were working at a facility. It was a halfway home for people suffering from mental health issues, and a little boy, the son of a person who was living in this halfway home, saw my pace car and said, "Can I touch your car?" And I looked at it and I said, "Better off, why don't you sit in it?" And I put him in the car in the driver's seat, and I remembered that little boy that was sitting on that stepladder. Mm-hmm. And what an impact it had on me at that time. And I can only hope that that moment with that little boy maybe had an impact on him.
That's beautiful.
Don, go ahead.
That's what I get out of it.
Okay.
By the way, that's what I get out of it. Answer your question.
I think it's important to understand, especially in the social media era, it's so easy to confuse that little neighborhood that you see on your screen with the real world.
Well, let me just tell you that in that regard, I had a conversation. You know, we've had some contentious times over the last 3 or 4 years, and there were people posting on Facebook about what we should or shouldn't be believing, and one person pinned me down. They said, "Why aren't you posting?" And I said, "Because I'm out engaged in doing acts.
Right.
I am involved in the community. And so rather than taking an hour to put up a Facebook post, why don't you volunteer at the girls' club or the boys' club and engage in action that will change people's lives rather than just postings?"
Man, need a high five on that, bro. That's beautiful.
What would you say has been your most impactful act of service that you've seen fruit in the community that you're most proud of at this point?
Well, that's a good, hard question.
That's his job.
Yeah.
He's a hard question to ask.
Wait till we get to the taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Both personal and global.
Let's pull back, and when I look at some of my engagement in the sports community first, I helped raise the funding to bring the Super Bowl to Indianapolis in 2012. We more recently had the NBA All-Star Game and the College Football Playoff National Championship game. We had the men's Final Four that ultimately was under the bubble. And I led the Indy Championships Fund that raised all the money to fund those events. Those were big events in our community.
Yeah.
And they touched the lives of many. I mean, we had like 12,000 volunteers for the Super Bowl. Every one of those events always has a legacy element to it. And I can think about the legacy elements in the Super Bowl, such as the Super Cures, which focused on curing breast cancer. I can think about the NFL Legacy Center located at Tech High School that impacts that Near East Side community. More recently, we put great funding into teachers in the state of Indiana as part of the College Football Playoff National Championship game. We impacted 24 different communities as part of the NBA All-Star Game. So I look at those broadly speaking, and I think that's an impact. Okay, that
Yeah.
on one hand, I think I look at it and say proudly that we have had a legacy impact in our community. So at the high level and on the big playing field, that's what I would point to. I think on the smaller playing field, I would look to an organization maybe not a lot of people hear about, but the Indy Public Safety Foundation, which we have raised a lot of money for. And they're out there doing the dirty work of trying to make our communities safer. We're funding the violence interrupter programs. We're doing things to try to, one by one, change a person's life. And I'm pretty proud of that.
And with that, you aren't a one-man show. I know that. You're a relational person. What are some of those relationships in the city? Citizen 7 is about forging friendships and relationships together. Tell us a little bit about your experience there and some of those relationships that you've had that are really meaningful to you along the way.
Well, the opportunity to interact with a broad spectrum of people over the course of my time here in Indy has been amazing. I mean, we all know great leaders in this community, like a Jim Morris, a Ted Boehm. There are others who led the charge as we unveiled the sports strategy, and I've been able to interact and see how they use their platform to take what they find and make it better. So I'm extremely grateful. At the same time, I've built strong relationships with my children and their peers, and I get to see the great work that young group of people are doing. For example, the young group that's helping advance the Olympic swimming trials that we will have here in Indianapolis later in June. It's a young millennial group that is doing the hard work there. So they're out there doing that work. I've built a broad network. I never don't miss the opportunity to meet somebody new. And I try to follow up. I tried to build those relationships by dropping them a little email here. I have note cards I keep at my desk. I oftentimes will scratch out a handwritten note and mail it to somebody. And I get great personal satisfaction out of just building that network. In terms of one or two people, I look at more of the examples. I think a person like Jim Morris is a great example about being a connector of people. I think Allison Millington is a tremendous example of humble leadership. And I look at those examples and just ask myself, am I doing that? Can I be better?
What would you say the rhythm is like for your weeks? I mean, how again, back to the mentoring question to the younger guys in our audience, are you having lunch every day? Are you going to, is it parties? Like, how are you actually connecting with the folks that you're talking about that kind of builds this network of people that help guide Indianapolis?
Well, and it's been built in many respects over many years, and you have to maintain, there's a maintenance element to it. So I'm constantly reaching out to people to schedule coffee. I'm constantly reaching out to schedule lunch, maybe a glass of wine at the end of the workday. And so I am very intentional about who do I need to connect with and make sure who haven't I talked to in a while? Yeah. And so I'm very intentional about thinking through that. Or I might see somebody that, wow, that was Greg. I hadn't talked to Greg in a little while. And I, a lot of times, will just take my phone out and I'll put a little note in it in my notes, call Greg Enas, and simply keep that, use that technology as your memory, and just put a note in quickly. And then you can, I try to at least once a week sit down at my desk and go through all those kinds of notes and look at everything that's on my plate and get myself organized for the week. My weeks flow. Sometimes the entire day is busy. Sometimes I have a morning where I'm just out in the yard working and thinking about what are the next big challenges, because I use that time to just think and refuel for whatever is coming next. So it's just a matter of consciously cultivating the network. When I joined C7, a friend said, you ought to come to this with me. Well, you got a choice at that point. You can either take a risk and go meet a bunch of men you don't know, or you can stay home. And I chose to go meet a bunch of men. Turns out I knew a lot of them. But I've also made new friendships through that. And so there's a conscious decision point. I'm either going to do this or I'm not. And you have to be very intentional and say, yes, do it.
Along the way, Dave, we all get tested by adversity. And so just to be candid, I know I've had a crucible that's brought me to faith, knowing that someone bigger out there is helping me. But has there been a time in your life that's really formed you and molded you relative to understanding the bigger picture, a crucible of faith, if I could use those words, that motivates you and inspires you even today?
When I was at Tech High School, and this is no criticism about all my friends and peers at Tech, because I had some dear friendships, which are still some of the dearest I have. But oftentimes there wasn't a lot of competition. I grew up in a very connected home, and many of my friends and peers didn't have that same opportunity. We had money. We didn't feel rich. We weren't rich, but we felt rich because we had a lot of love and integration in our family. But academically, perhaps I wasn't as prepared for Wabash College. And so one of the greatest adverse moments where I had to find something deep inside of me was at Wabash College, when I realized I can't just use the same old techniques I got away with in high school. I got to reach deep inside of me, work harder, work better. And let me tell you, there was a lot of praying in that process. Help me find that.
Right.
And somewhere through the professors at Wabash College, I joined a fraternity. Through the fraternity brothers, people helped me find it. But it was things like going back to my high school, to the geometry teacher, who I kind of just, half paid attention, and said, I need to learn high school geometry like in 3 days, and she gave me the book.
I'd be praying.
And I took it home, and
praying.
I was studying geometry so that I could sustain myself at Wabash. So I that came to mind, that there's a moment in your life when you do have to reach inside and find something you didn't know was there that will sustain you the rest of your life. And that was my moment.
Wow, that's powerful.
So I want to go back to, I imagine there may be some, look, I'll just lay it on the table. I'm a libertarian,
Okay.
which means I look at a lot of the sports strategy, and I used to be very skeptical of it. And then I started producing Robert Vane's Leaders and Legends podcast, and I met a lot of the people that you're talking about, Jim Morris, Ted Boehm. I learned the story. I understood kind of what was at stake for the city, how it helped the city grow. So I've got a couple questions about that, because for anybody skeptical, you look at this and you go, okay, well, there's a group, a cabal of insiders, right? But really, when you sit down face to face with people that you just maybe read some articles and go, oh, I'm against all this. I'm against a ruling elite or whatever populist nonsense you see on Facebook. Talk about the importance of networking and networks in terms of, I don't want to say governing, but the history of Indianapolis is there's always a group of citizens that are connecting to move the city forward. Something like the city committee, where you have Bill Crawford, Senate Democrat, and Lieutenant Governor Mutz meeting once a month at breakfast going, how are we going to make the city better? Right? That's like a very powerful story of connection and moving the city forward. I mean, what would you say to somebody who's skeptical of these networks and what they really are when you're a part of those conversations?
So I'm going to connect libertarianism with my response, okay?
Okay. The good salesman here.
The guiding philosophy of my life has been a simple phrase that I, at one time in my life, attributed to Thomas Jefferson, but I now understand through research it goes further back to a French philosopher. And it's a very simple phrase. Liberty is the luxury of the self-disciplined. Indiana, I think, has a great history of libertarianism, and that's not a negative. But what I think I mean by that is of self-discipline. And I believe that you can look at those people who were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but when they look at trying to do the common good, they are self-disciplined in how they practice that. We have, quite frankly, I think, a problem in our country, which is that people feel like they can assert their rights, but they don't necessarily accept the responsibilities that come with that. Oftentimes, the forefathers and the foremothers of our city that grew this city recognized they had to be disciplined in how they took their actions. And they worked cooperatively across party lines. They realized that it has to transcend generations. It has to transcend politics because, we have had Democrat mayors, we've had Republican mayors, we've had Democrat governors, we've had Republican governors, and that will continue. That one party is not going to control everything forever. It evolves. So the folks that have been, I think, our great leaders in our community transcend politics because they act in a disciplined manner.
So how do you keep that? How do you instill that in the next generation and transition that leadership in the spirit of Calvin Fletcher and the great city fathers that you're talking about and mothers like Allison Langdon? How do you translate that to the next generation? What kind of leadership development do you recommend?
Well, I think that one, it is incumbent upon, we've got a great generational transformation going on right now. We are taking the baby boomer generation, World War II generation's pretty much out of the workforce, and unfortunately that great generation, is in many cases passing away. But now the baby boomers are leaving the workforce, and you've got, the Gen Xers are a thin generation population-wise, so the millennials are coming into immense responsibilities. I don't think not Gen Xers, the baby boomers can just walk out and say, I'm going to Florida and I'm going to hang out.
Please don't.
They have a responsibility, and it's to coach, to advise, and to mentor the next generation that's coming along. And I think it is incumbent upon our community, our generation and our community to recognize that responsibility. And I'm not sure that we always do. So one, I would say to my peers, my baby boomer peers, recognize that you need to coach, mentor, and advise the generation that's going to step into your shoes, because it is an enormous shift of responsibility from people in their late 50s to someone perhaps in their late 30s. And there's a lot of experience that they have not yet had where they need your insight. So one, I would say to my generation, live up to your responsibility and coach, mentor those coming behind you. Secondly, I would say to the generation coming behind, don't look at us and say, oh, go away, boomer. Okay? Whatever, boomer. Listen, you don't have to accept everything. You don't have to agree on everything, but show mutual respect. The boomers need to give the millennials respect. Don't act like you think they're lazy or they're weird because they game or they sit in their, they're sitting in, they're happy to work from home. You know what? That's their reality. Respect it and show that respect. And likewise, that respect needs to be reciprocated. And so open your mind, and open your learning and to having the insight of those who have traveled before you, because history repeats itself. So I think it's not easy, but we've got to have both generations willing to engage in that cross-fertilization.
And what would you say to the next generation to keep them here in Indianapolis? What's special, or what can be special about the city, so that people aren't seeking their fortunes and their significance in life elsewhere?
I think one, we are a very welcoming community. We always have been. We have had moments that tested that, but as a general rule, I laugh, but for many years I'd hear people say Indianapolis is just a great place to raise your family. Well, there's a reason why. It's because people are welcoming and friendly. And when we had the Super Bowl here, I remember the New England Patriots were coming here, right? And there were volunteers. I saw a guy interviewed, and he said he was tailgating. He was from New England, and he said, I'm out of barbecue sauce. And within 10 minutes, 3 different people had showed up to bring him barbecue sauce. That's what kind of people we have here.
Yeah.
Okay? They're welcoming, and so you can build that. If you want to be part of something, then jump in and help build it, help sustain it, and make it better. But I think it's that community. We are really proud, and we're very humble at the same time. We have a lot to boast about, but you don't hear a lot of people boasting.
Right.
Instead, they just put their head down and get back to work.
Yeah.
Well, be part of that, because you'll meet some really neat people. You'll meet some diverse people that you may not have otherwise encountered in your life, and you can have a lot of fun doing it.
So I got a question. So I'm sitting here, let's say I'm in my 50s or 60s, and I don't really have anybody that I'm, quote, mentoring. Nobody's showed up on my door. Nobody's calling me. I'm a younger person in their early 30s, and nobody's really raising their hand, or I don't know a mentor. I work at home. My team is all around the country. How does one engage if I'm not being invited? Someone invited me early on to the Wheeler Mission Board, and that ended up, I met incredible people, and through that, a lot of other things kind of as a catalyst happened on a community involvement. But what advice might you give somebody who is maybe stuck in terms of they'd like to be doing something, but the phone isn't ringing?
Yeah, that's interesting, because oftentimes people need to be asked or need to be pulled along. And so one, I would first encourage both to get past that hurdle in their own mind. You can't open the door. A door won't be opened if you don't get past that hurdle.
It's a big thing, especially in my job. I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to bother somebody.
Right. And Indie Hub is a great example if you're a young person new to the city to get engaged with. They're trying to help people find places where they can get connected in the community. Our sports strategy has obviously been a very successful tool for the city, and you can go on Indy Sport or ISC IndySportsCorp.org and volunteer immediately. You don't need to be asked. There's a website link. You can volunteer, and let me tell you, they use you. Okay, they use you. We need the volunteers at the Sports Corp for numerous events. So there's another outlet. I've toyed with the idea, and Robert Vane actually interviewed me on this topic, but life happened and, hasn't really pushed it forward. But the concept of an Indy Corps, which was almost like a Peace Corps, but where we'd reach out to people who perhaps are retirees or have extra time on their hands, and maybe see if we couldn't create a corps of volunteers that would fill the gaps between what our institutions are trying to do and maybe give somebody an outlet. Now, that's a massive coordination role, to try to plug people into the right spots. But there are a lot of gaps. There are a lot of, there are a lot of overlap, but there are a lot of gaps. could we use people who have had experienced careers who are willing to step forward to almost create that kind of volunteer corps here in the city? That's one thought I've been kicking around in my head.
We are a much more diverse community than we were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. How do we engage more as friends, right? Because a lot of times you and I have a relationship. Therefore, then we have trust. Then you say, gosh, Don, would you like to join this board, or would you like to, help make a difference over here? And because of my relationship with you, I say, it wasn't my first thing, but since I like Dave, let's do that together. Any thoughts in terms of how we engage more diverse people, particularly if we're working from home or we're not in a show up at work kind of environment?
I think it does depend on how people want to be engaged. I mean, I think there are two issues in our community where we could use engagement of diverse nature, and one is in education and asking ourselves if we can leave our political preferences and our views at the door, but come together in a community conversation around what is working and what is not working, and try to attract diverse people to come together, because then maybe that could transition into people being more engaged with trying to help our education in this community.
Yeah.
The second one is, of course, gun violence. And again, I think a community conversation around gun violence, again, looking at what is working, what is not working, how can we scale it up in different communities, and trying to pull different parties in that may not have otherwise been at the table. Might be a couple ways to try to get people more engaged and expose ourselves to a more diverse set of humans in our community.
Yeah. You found some real passions, your interest in sports and your tax policy work, et cetera. It seems like each person kind of has to find what they care about and what they don't care about. Any thoughts on a process? Sometimes Peter Drucker has said we need to talk out loud our confusion. How do we better get a handle on what our own, kind of purpose is, and maybe what we would say no to versus what we'd say yes to?
The thought that goes through my mind is you do have to do a certain level of introspection and ask perhaps, where would I like to be? What would I have liked to have achieved in 5 years, maybe 10 years? And then sit back and ask yourself, no one else, what skills, what capabilities, what thinking capabilities do I need to have to be there? What do I need to prepare myself if I want to be right there in 10 years? And then begin to think about what experiences do I need to go out and give myself to better develop me, to prepare me for that particular role or that particular undertaking. And, it might be, you could do that within your career at an Eli Lilly and ask where do I want to be. It might be if you're a sole proprietor running your own business, where do I want this business to be? It might be a community volunteer or a community activist asking, I'm active, so why?
Yeah.
And what skills do I need to have to be better, and what experiences, therefore, do I need to give to myself?
Yeah.
And I believe you have to do that inventory of yourself. You have to really understand what fuels you. For me, it's always been mission-driven. And for me, the missions always have a connectivity to what I started with, take what you find here and make it better.
Yep.
And but once you get to whatever that is that you think you'd like to do, it is your responsibility and yours alone to figure out the experiences that you need to deliver to yourself to get you ready for that opportunity. Those are my thoughts.
I mean, what a beautiful thing if, folk listening, if all of us would just say, what experiences do I need to have in order to be where I want to be. And if we wrote 3 down and we acted upon those, we might have made a better world.
So true.
And that's where some good mentoring come in too, to ask those that have been there. What would you
Absolutely.
suggest?
I love the 2 or I guess 3 words. I am curious. I think a lot of times that when people are curious, Dave, I'm really curious about how you moved from X to Y at Lilly. I'm really curious how you chose the legal. I mean, in other words, people are willing to tell their story. They're willing to give a perspective and to approach that in a humble way. I found really opened some doors of just saying, "Hey, Dave, I'm curious about how I could be involved in sports. I don't really feel called to such and such, and I don't want to be at the little league, but I'm curious. Here's my background, here's my strengths, any perspective, guidance." And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, I never would have thought about that, but you have a more of a global perspective on some of those things, and you might call John Jones.
Yeah, that's where I was thinking is oftentimes you earn your right to advise, for lack of a better description, by listening. Well, in this instance, if you're listening, if you say I am curious to a person that led a path before you, and you let them tell their story, and there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end.
Yeah.
And let them tell the story.
Yeah.
Then they see that you're listening, you're trying to learn, and they become a person. You're not necessarily, you earn your right. You're not going to become their advisor because you listen, but you might well become someone they're going to favor. And by favoring, I mean they're going to open a door for you.
Okay, I'm curious. What's happening in June that you're excited about, that you need to get us excited about? Give us the details.
All right. We have Indianapolis is hosting the U.S. Olympic swimming trials. It is a 9-day event. We are building 3 swimming pools right now in Lucas Oil Stadium. Fire trucks are filling them with water. And by the way, it's water that was taken from White River and cleaned, and is now being put into the pools. We, on June 15th, the opening night, we are going to host in Indianapolis the largest swim meet ever. It will break the world record for the largest swim meet ever.
What are you expecting? What are you talking about?
Well, we're hopeful for 30,000 people.
Beautiful.
Lucas Oil Stadium, half of it will be the competition arena, and the other half will have 2 pools. They're the warm-up, cool-down pools. And it'll allow, for many swimmers, this is their Olympics. I mean, people that won't go to the Olympics are faster than many from other countries that will.
Right.
This is the most competitive swimming. But it's not just the event in Lucas Oil Stadium. I mean, first off, we're going to be, the eyes of the nation are going to be on us. We're going to have 9 nights of coverage on NBC in the evening.
Wow.
There will be prelims during the day at 11, and then the finals will be at 8 p.m. in the evening. We have fan activations that will be in place all over the city, almost like the Super Bowl was. Georgia Street, it's going to be called they're Swimming Live, and it's going to be an activation of Georgia Street. We're going to have the Toyota Aqua Zone inside the convention center. So it's going to be all about swimming. There will be concerts. The city is going to be on fire from the 15th to the 23rd. And it's really kind of cool because it's 100 years after we hosted the Olympic trials in Broad Ripple Park. So this is a centennial experience.
I didn't even know about that. I'll have to look that up. That's cool.
And the Olympics that followed in both instances is in Paris.
Huh.
And so we are also on USA Swimming Live on Georgia Street. We will have a replica of the Eiffel Tower that is being built as we speak.
Built by the Latinas Welding Guild, which is warehoused here at Switchboard.
Oh,
where
wow,
the
that's
studio's
great.
at. Yeah.
Yes. And so they're building that. It'll be 65 or 66 feet tall replica of the Eiffel Tower. So there's going to be a lot going on. We're still selling tickets. And so if people are interested, they can go to www.usaswimming.org. And I tested that before I came down here today, and it pops
works.
up.
We'll
and
put the
tickets
link
are
in
there.
the show description.
But the other thing I would say is the community has come together. I've talked with over 40 central Indiana businesses that have signed on as what we call a Centennial Partner, or they've purchased suites, they've sponsored other parts of it. So you're going to see tremendous engagement once again by our community businesses and our community not-for-profits and individuals.
Artists,
Yes.
local artists. There's 5 local artists that will be. It's sort of like the All-Star Game, the Super Bowl. I mean, there's participation from the art community. There's obviously concerts. I'm excited about Fastball. That's one of my favorite bands. There's going to be all these different elements of Indianapolis work together on these events from the arts community, the nonprofits. Lilly is a big sponsor of this. There's, business, government, everybody seems to come together. And so what is the benefit for Indianapolis? I read in the Indianapolis Business Journal that this is like opening up our front porch to the world. Is that a good analogy?
Well, I think it is, and I think we repeatedly do it. I mean, you think of like an Eli Lilly. They need to attract people from all over the world, from the East Coast, the West Coast. They need to get the best researchers here. They need to get the best healthcare professionals here. So in that instance, they want to project Indianapolis as a world-class city and come here to live, because you can work here, you can play here, you can live here, and you can learn here. And so for an Eli Lilly, the same applies for a Cummins. The same applies for a lot of the smaller logistics companies here in town. There's a burgeoning life sciences sector in our community, a tech sector, but they all need to be lured away, and so we need.
So it's
from
almost
other
like
places.
Columbus and Cummins, how Cummins built Columbus up to be kind of a cultural hub to attract people.
You really are trying to build a place and put us at the forefront of the nation, so that when people see Indianapolis, they think, wow, that place has got some things going on. And that brings people to this city. And our employers need those people. Indiana needs those people. We continue to secure we attract great investment, but we're going to need people to work. And so we need to continue to present a world-class depiction of our city and our state at all times. We need to open up the front porch.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and 81,000 hospitality workers benefit from it too.
And that's what I should have said, is that the hospitality sector benefits greatly. They had a rough patch during COVID. These are great opportunities between the NBA All-Star Game, the Olympics, swimming trials. This is great for our hospitality community.
All right, last pitch. How do I get tickets? Tell me again. What are you most excited about? What should I see?
Well, they're going to be themed tonight. So if you go to either the Indiana Sports Corporation website or you go to usaswimming.org, you're going to see a rundown of themed nights. The first night's our record-breaking night. Second night is built around family and Father's Day. That's because it's Sunday on Father's Day.
Right.
The 20th focuses on students. The 21st focuses on military and first responders. So there are themed nights. So you might look at those themes and ask, which night do I want to be there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The last night will, of course, be the conclusion on the 23rd. That I'm sure will be a very exciting night. But yes, my last promotion, www.usaswimming.org or the Indiana Sports Corporation website. Get your tickets.
Is it true that you're singing the Star Spangled Banner on opening night?
Please.
We want to attract people to the community. Okay, we want to attract people to the community. I'm no Whitney Houston or so.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us here on Big Hearted Indy. We are on YouTube. We are on a podcast feed, so we unfortunately didn't get time to ask questions like we normally do. We're so engrossed in the conversation. We're so thankful for your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And obviously, thanks on behalf of Greg and Don for joining us here on Big Hearted Indy, presented by Citizen 7. Go to citizen7.com. sign up for the email newsletter. You can find out when the next event is. And if you got something out of this episode, please share it on YouTube or share the YouTube link and share the podcast and let other people know about it. We appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for joining us here on Big Hearted Indy.